Hi everyone, welcome back, or welcome if you're new. My name's Jean, I'm an author and ancient historian, and these are my top 10 tips for writers, new or old. So for those of you who are new to my channel and me and have just stumbled across this video because you're looking for some writing advice, I thought I'd give you a little bit of context so you could decide whether to listen to me or not about who I am. Like I said, I'm an ancient historian and an author. At this point I have written 8 books, one of which isn't actually out until next year, for a range of ages. So I've written for children and for adults and for teens. I've also written both non-fiction and fiction, and I have edited 6 anthologies as well as 1 academic volume. So I have got a decent back catalogue behind me at this point. I got my first book deal in 2019, but I think like most people I have been writing for far longer than that. I've been writing since I was a kid. I've always adored writing, and I have learned a lot of things along the way because I've also made a lot of mistakes along the way, and I have continuously, I feel at least, improved as I have, you know, gone on this journey as a writer. And I do now occasionally get asked for advice on writing. So I thought I would sit down and just compile my top pieces of advice that are widely applicable, some of which you may already be applying to your work, some of which you might need reminding of, some of which might just click with you in this moment and you've not heard them before. But I think they also apply to whether you're just starting out, turning your hand to keyboard or pen for the very first time, or you've been doing this for a while and actually have published books out there. Now, most of this is also about the writing process itself rather than actually getting published. That's a kind of whole other topic, but I will touch on how some of this advice is relevant if you are also looking to get published. But without further ado, you're here for the tips, so let's get into them. So tip number 1 is actually the one that undercuts this entire video to an extent, because essentially my first piece of advice is to pick and choose what works for you. I think generally we approach giving advice and taking advice as if these things are absolute certainties and they work for everybody and it's all applicable at all times. But in reality, not everything works for everybody. For example, I think one of the most popular pieces of writing advice you'll find out there is to write every day. Now that's a lovely idea, right? That is a great idea in practice, and some people will caveat that by saying it could literally be a word, it could literally be a sentence, but it's also not always possible. Let's be honest, life is complicated and we don't always have a chance, a moment in the day, or even the mental capacity to write something every single day. Now, I do think it is generally good advice to continuously be honing your craft, to continuously be writing things down, but if you take something like write every day super literally, then you might also then feel not great about yourself or your writing if one day you don't write something down, and you might feel like, well, I've broken the habit now, what's even the point? So in that kind of situation, I always feel like take any piece of advice with a pinch of salt, because I do not write every day. I write most days, but I don't write every single day. That's particularly true at this stage of my career, where writing is a large part of my job. It's not just something I do for fun, it's also my job. So, you know, on Sundays I want to play board games and go for walks and watch movies with my husband, and I don't always want to do more writing. Sometimes I do, but sometimes I don't, and that's perfectly okay. And I think it's really important to remember that what works for somebody won't necessarily work for you, and while it's good to try out different pieces of advice, don't be super harsh on yourself if you can't stick to a piece of advice you've heard touted again and again and again. Okay, with that out of the way, we come to piece of advice number 2, which I genuinely think is the most important piece of advice I will give you in this video. Maybe like tied with one of the later ones I think is particularly important, but I think this is one of the most practical, useful tips and the best thing that I've ever learned, which is to write the rubbish. Simply put, you can edit rubbish, you cannot edit nothing. If you're struggling to get words down on the page, consider to what extent that struggle stems from your expectation of the words being perfect. So I think when a lot of people talk about writer's block, and I know this won't apply to every situation, they're actually just talking about like perfection blocking their writing, which is that you think you've got an idea, you've got a character, you've got a setting, you've got a plot that you want to imagine and bring to life, but when you start writing, or when you try to formulate a sentence in your head, it doesn't live up to your expectations, and therefore you just sort of sit there staring at the screen or your notepad wondering why you can't translate what's in your head onto the page. Nobody's work is perfect off the bat. Like, this is just a fact, and And maybe there's a caveat that there's one person in a million who is, I don't care about them because we're not them. Like, you and me, we're not them, and that's fine. Everybody has to go through the rubbish stages because, like I said, you can only edit the rubbish, you can't edit nothing. If you just sit there staring at the blank page forever and ever and ever, you will get nowhere further forward. But the more you write down, the more you can go over it and revise it and improve upon it until it looks the way you really want it to do. Revision and editing is a huge part of writing, and that requires you having something on the page. So I always tell anybody to write the rubbish. And I guess in that sense as well, it's also good not to be too attached to everything you write because some of it's probably going to get deleted. Let's be honest, some of it's probably going to get deleted. But yeah, don't let perfection stop you from just writing whatever, because not only can it be improved upon, but the more you write, the more regularly you write, the more words you put down on the page, the more your work will improve and you will get into that flow, and you'll sort of slowly, I think, erode that writer's block that's in your head. So yes, write the rubbish. Next up, my third piece of advice comes with a caveat because it's one of those pieces of advice that's not going to apply to everybody, and that is to avoid editing as you go if it's contributing to my last point, which is that if you find yourself writing a paragraph and then spending days and days and days just perfecting this paragraph and getting no further forward in your story, if you're writing, say, a novel, or just any further forward in your book if you're writing in any genre, then you have become your own worst enemy. In the same way that you should embrace writing rubbish, embrace letting the rubbish sit there, if that makes sense. Just keep going, just power through, just keep writing more and more. I think you will find that you steadily improve, and that you also can go back later, much later, and more easily improve that first piece of rubbish that you've written. Whereas if you constantly feel like you have to revise and edit every sentence or every paragraph as you go, and that's preventing you from continuing on, then you're going to need to let go of that editing mindset early on in the process and save it for later on. Now, I know there are going to be exceptions to this. I know some people really thrive editing as they write, but I think you need to be introspective enough to recognise whether or not something like that is working for you. Is it holding you back? So I think consider these things, consider that point and think about, is it working for you? Are you getting further forward? Are you actually managing to write an entire book or an entire short story? Or have you been sitting there staring at the same unfinished project for years because you're constantly editing as you go and never getting to the end? Really just developing a sense of self-awareness with your writing is probably the best piece of advice I could give you. Then my fourth piece of advice is actually one that has taken me a long time to embrace, taken me a long time to accept that it's good advice, because it's a piece of advice I think that I heard for years and thought, nah, doesn't apply to me, until I realised it does. I just needed to figure out how it applied to me, and that is to have a plan. So we often talk about writing as if there are two categories of people. There are the planners and the pantsers. The pantsers are people who just like go for it off the seat of their pants and just like write, and they don't need to have that plan for where they're going to end up, for what the book's going to look like, what the structure of the book's going to be, whereas there's some people who create these very, very, very detailed plans. And I always thought of myself as a pantser, but I have to say, the more I have written, the more my career has become writing and the more books I have worked on, the more I've become a planner. And that's not to say that I am now a super detailed planner. I do not sit down and write like 3-page long summaries of every single chapter. I don't think I will ever be that organised. I want to still jump into what I'm writing, whether it's fiction or non-fiction, and just get started and get the juices flowing and figure out what's working and, you know, write that rubbish and just get on with it. But I have found that my best work comes from when I have a rough plan. So I mean rough, like it could literally just be, okay, so I want to write this novel. What is my 3-act or my 6-act structure? What is the sort of inciting incident? What is the like turning moment in the middle? And how does it conclude at the end? And like, where are my key points in relation to that? So like, obviously I want, say, my love interests to meet. I want them to develop their romantic connection, and I want something to interfere with it. And those things I kind of jot down. And it generally, for me, whether it's non-fiction or fiction, ends up looking like about a page. It's a short plan. But I then have that. I then have thought about all of that in advance. And that has helped me so much with finishing things. So I started so many novels that never got finished in the past, and now I have finished novels, and I think having that rough plan has been the difference between finishing and not finishing a novel. Piece of advice number 5 might seem like an obvious one, but I do think it's an important one, and that is to read. I think it's actually really, really, really important as a writer to also read. And that doesn't mean you have to be reading physically, audiobooks work as well. But say you want to write a non-fiction book, an accessible non-fiction book about a topic you're passionate about. If you've never read an accessible non-fiction book, then I think you're going to find that you struggle to convey that accessibility and that story and that topic to another person if you don't have some ideas of the conventions. If you don't read, you just end up lost at sea with absolutely no foundations as a writer. And I also think reading can be a huge inspiration as a writer. I think it can inspire you in regards to, wow, this book's amazing, it makes me feel so happy and joyous, I want to share that feeling with somebody else. Wow, this book terrifies me, it explores a really insidious idea and makes me like shake in my boots in the horror genre. I want to be able to do that too. So there's that inspiration in regard to like what a book can convey. On the other hand, you might literally be inspired by something. You might read like a classic collection of fairy tales and then think, oh, I want to retell one of these fairy tales. Or you might read a book about a period in history and think, but what about this aspect of history? I feel like it wasn't touched upon, and go and do all your own research. I cannot express to you how beneficial reading is to you as a writer. And that's not saying that every time you read a book, you should be reading it from like, how can this aid me as a writer? Like, how can I learn from this? I just believe, and I believe this so strongly, that if you are sort of regularly reading, you are also actually honing your own craft as a writer as well, if that's something you want to do. And that's not to say you have to read 100 books a year. Like, that could be one book every 2 months because maybe you're a slow reader. Like, it doesn't matter. There's no hard and fast rules about how much you have to be reading. I think you always need to be learning from others, and that includes reading, because it can also just be that great reminder of like, this is why I'm writing. Like, this is why I'm writing a book, to give somebody that same feeling that I get from this book. So yeah, read. Tip number 6 is that you can't actually edit your own book. Now, of course you can do the initial edits to your own book. I mean, every writer has to edit their own book, but I mean that in the sense that you can't be the only eyes on your book at the end of the day. If this is something you're looking to share with readers, if this is something you are looking to go beyond your computer or your notepad, and it's not just something you're doing for yourself and you expect other people to read it, for your book to be the best version of itself that it can be, you need outside feedback. And that doesn't mean you have to go down the traditional publishing route and get an editor with a publishing house, but if you are self-publishing, I would highly encourage you to hire an editor, to join writing feedback groups so you can talk with other writers and read each other's work and feedback on that, to look into beta readers. There's a million different ways you can get eyes on your book, to get feedback and to get editorial help, but it is really quite integral if you want to like cross over to that stage of finding readers, because you will never catch everything yourself. You will never catch everything yourself. To a certain extent, we just see what we expect to see. We read the words we expect to be there, we read the ideas we expect to be conveyed there, but we don't always notice if we haven't actually conveyed those because we have too much information. Like, we know everything that went into what we're writing. And then there's just little things, like most writers have filler words that they're obsessed with. Like, I just recently got the final edits back on my 2025 non-fiction book, and my editor pointed out that I was obsessed with the word meanwhile. I don't even know when this happened because I don't think it's true of previous books, but I was just chucking in those meanwhiles all over the shop. Like, half the word count was the word meanwhile. So I had to go through and eradicate most of those because they were not actually necessary. But we fall into these little habits that I think we need other people's eyes to see for us, really. So like, that is something I would look into once you're at that stage. Of course, I would like advise that you have something written before you get there. Alright, so I'm not actually sure why I wrote down most of these pieces of advice in the order that I did write them down, not gonna lie, because I actually think number 7 is the second, tied for first place, most important piece of advice in this video. I've just saved it for spot 7. And that is to not tie your entire self-worth up in your writing. So this is, of course, easier said than done. I think a lot of this stuff is easier said than done, but we can only get better at doing them if we continuously remind ourselves about them and try to practice them. And this is one that, again, I am still constantly working on. I think I'm better than I used to be with this, but it's still something that I have to remind myself of reasonably regularly. There's almost this idea that you are your work, you know, you are the book you've written, that book is you, and that is just not true. Your identity and your self-worth and your value as a human being should not be tied up in something you create, because you can always create more things. And it also can really negatively impact your perception of yourself and also your ability to continue creating if you think like that. So this can look like a variety of things. I think before you're ever like published and you're just writing something for like the fun of it, or maybe with the idea of one day getting it published, this can look like not getting those words down on the page, or the words not looking the way you want them to look. Like you've got this idea in your head, but when you write it down it doesn't feel like it's conveying that, and then you start to think, I'm a rubbish writer, I can't do this, what's the point? I give up, etc, etc. And that's not a great mindset, because like I've already mentioned, you've got to just write the rubbish and you're not the rubbish, it will get better. It can also look like simply not finishing a book, like not getting to the end of the book and feeling like you have failed. Sometimes some projects don't work out and you do need to give up on them and you won't finish them, and that's absolutely fine, but you certainly are not less of a person or a valuable human being because of it. Unfortunately, however, this is not something that goes away once you have finished a book or once the book does look the way you want to look, because if you then want to try and get it in readers' hands, if you want to publish the book, whether independently or through traditional publishing routes, there are so many points in your career or your publishing and writing journey where you might find this mindset creeping back up on you. It can look like reviews, and I don't read reviews. I think that's also just a generally really good piece of advice for published writers, is not to read your reviews. They're not for you, they're for other readers. But I still sometimes get emails or messages from people who want to tell me about how they didn't like my work. Like, it doesn't matter that I avoid the reviews, sometimes the reviews still find me, but I'm not going to take that personally. Like, at the end of the day, it's work. I'm going to write more things in the future, I'm going to keep working, I'm going to keep improving, and also taste is subjective. But even before that, it can just look like getting feedback from an editor who says, you don't need this chapter, or this doesn't make sense, and feel like, oh, I'm a crap writer, oh, I'm rubbish. But that is just part of the process. These are all such important things. Oh, and what am I saying? I've literally just skipped over one of like the biggest stages of rejection and like self-worth questioning you might go through as an author, and that's just like looking for a publishing deal, looking for an agent. You will get rejections. Like, you will get rejections. Not everybody's going to want your book. It would be weird if they did. And the same might happen when you're on submission with publishers. Not everybody is going to want to publish your book, or they might want to change the book you're writing before they publish it. And none of those things are personal. None of those things are attacks on you. Can also be a good reminder that not every book is the book that's going to be the book that gets you published. Every single writer I know who has gone on to become a published writer in traditional publishing has projects that never went anywhere. I have projects that have never went anywhere. These things happen. Not every project is going to go somewhere. And again, that is why it's really, really important not to equate your worth with your writing and a singular project, because it's very easy to get into the mindset of, this is my life, this is my life's work, I am valuable because of this one idea and this one book I have. You are so much more than your work. You are so much more than that one book. So just keep reminding yourself of that, even if you need to set yourself like a monthly reminder on your phone where it pops up and tells you that, because it's really, really, really important advice. Then we come to tip number 8, which is to write what you want. So I think it can be really, really tempting to see that something is popular, and if we're somebody who wants to get our work published, think, I have to write that. So this is not like based on reality, but imagine that werewolf books were really, really popular. Like, everyone's reading werewolf books this year, so you think, I'm gonna write a werewolf book, even though you don't like werewolves. Now, this obviously doesn't apply if you do like werewolves, but you're gonna do one because you think you have to do one. in 2 years time, by the time you're getting that published, werewolves might not even be cool anymore. That's not to say you shouldn't write the werewolf book if you want to write it, because trends are secular, they continuously come around, and not everything that is published to a trend. That's not to diminish that trends don't impact on publishing, but if you're seeing what's coming out in the bookshops right now and you're noticing current trends and you think, I'm specifically going to write to those trends for no other reason than because they're trendy, they might not be trendy by the time you come along to submitting your book. So you should be just writing what you're passionate about. The best book will come of passion and enthusiasm and something you care about and are interested about. That is what will then result in the best book. And by the time you come to submit, maybe that's what's trendy, or maybe you become the trendsetter. Like, you cannot constantly be holding yourself to trends. And equally that can feel like, oh no, what's the point in writing a werewolf book right now because they're popular now and might not be in 2 years. Just write what you want. Write the thing you care about. You're more likely to finish it. You're more likely to do a good job. And you don't know where the market is going to be. Like, you don't know what's going to happen with publishing. You don't know what's going to be trendy. You don't know what's going to be popular. You can read all the forecasts you want, but nobody knows. Especially in our age of social media, you don't know what's going to be trendy. You've just got to write the thing that you want to write, and that will result in the best book. My 9th tip, however, does require you to pay some attention to publishing if you're looking to get published. So again, this one's more specifically for people looking to get published, and that is to sort of be aware of the publishing industry, and also to remember that you are rarely the exception. That feels like such a mean thing to say. And again, this sort of ties back to my point about reading more generally, to read in your genre, for example, to like have some idea of genre conventions, because if you decide to write a 300,000 word contemporary romance book and then want to get a publishing deal, you are going to struggle. But more generally, it is advisable to be aware of conventions within your genre and in the publishing industry. That doesn't mean writing to trends, but it does mean being aware that, you know, there are like ranges of word counts normally in certain genres, and yes, there will be an exception. Yes, there will be a book, there will be a 300,000 word romance book, but if yours doesn't end up being that exception and you act indignant or feel indignation over that with, say, an agent who says this is too long for a romance book, you're not going to get anywhere. You're not going to get your book published, you're not going to get it in readers' hands. Like, that is not how you go about getting a publishing deal. But like I said at the beginning, pick and choose what advice applies to you. I think it's just worth researching those things. So if you're writing in fantasy, you might want to look up like what the average adult fantasy book length is now, not 30 years ago, now. And definitely if you're planning on approaching agents, don't be sending them books wildly over word counts that they've specified they don't want. So if you send an agent a book that's 200,000 words and they don't want any books over 100,000 words, they're not going to read it, you're not going to get a publishing deal, you're not the exception. And you can't get mad at somebody if they email you back saying, I'm not reading this because it's too long. They already said that in advance. So there you go. So last but not least, number 10 is to just keep writing, to practice. Oh, it's so basic, it's so boring, but practice makes perfect. Or in the words of Olivia Benson, practice never makes you worse at anything. You will only grow and improve as a writer if you just keep going for it. That involves reading, it involves writing the rubbish, it involves like sort of freeing yourself of any expectations and just giving it a shot, and just go for it and trying different things and new things and picking and choosing what advice works for you. If anything, everything I've said in this video really just culminates in this point, which is to just practice, to just keep trying. I am so much better a writer than I was when I was 7 and first decided that I wanted to write a novel. I also didn't know when I was 7 that 10 pages was not long enough to be a novel. So I've also learned that. But I just think you constantly grow as a writer. But those are my 10 pieces of advice for writers old and new. Hopefully one of them at least was useful and you've not sat through this whole video thinking, what is she on about? Even if they were just reminders that you needed to hear today. But if you have any pieces of advice for other writers that you have learned along the way, then please do share them. I'm sure anyone reading the comments will appreciate them, and you might help me because I think I'm still learning and I'm still growing and I'm still practicing. So I'll never say no to new pieces of advice or tips that might help me out. But in the meantime, let me know if you'd like any more writing or publishing content. I will link any videos I think are relevant in the description box down below. And until next time, happy reading and happy writing, and I'll see you all again soon. Bye everyone.